Welcome to the Bible in a Year podcast, a resource from Enter the Bible. Journey with us through the books of the Bible, discovering more about Scripture and how it shapes our lives today. I'm Kristofer Phan Coffman.
I'm Kathryn Schifferdecker.
And our guest today is a frequent flyer here on the Bible in a Year podcast. It's Dr. Cory Driver, who is Director of Research at the Center for Life at Miami University of Ohio. Cory's been on a few podcasts with us before, and it's always a joy to have you.
Thanks so much. I'm so glad to be here.
Well, thank you, Cory. And it's particularly appropriate that you're here because you've talked with us about several Old Testament books, which is your field, your Hebrew Bible, Old Testament. And today is the podcast on the last two books of the Old Testament, in the Christian ordering of the books of Zechariah and Malachi. So for those who are frequent listeners who listen to us most weeks, we will be moving to the New Testament next week. Yay!
Yay!
We'll be in Matthew next week. And today, again, we're wrapping up our series on the Old Testament. Obviously, we'll be talking about the Old Testament as we talk about New Testament books as well. But just for those of you who like a bit of trivia, we're about 3/5 of the way through the year here in August, and we're about 3/5 of the way through the 66 books of the Bible with this episode. So it's a momentous occasion. So thank you for helping us with this particular episode, Cory.
So honored.
All right. So Zechariah and Malachi, and I realize this is going to be a little challenging because they're two separate books, but we had to fit 66 books in 52 weeks. So that's the reason here. Zechariah and Malachi are both books of the minor prophets. And again, as we said, for other minor prophets, this isn't because they're less important, but because they're relatively small books. So can you give us a quick summary or outline of each of those books?
Sure. So Zechariah is addressed to returned exiles. Like you think about the Ezra and Nehemiah time, and the people are back, and it's an inflection point, right? So now what, right? Like you've returned, the temple is on its way, right? Like we're reconstituting society, the walls, all the rest. What does it mean to be God's people? Right? Like, is another exile in view or not? Are we ready? Do we keep mourning the past? Do we look to the future? Who do we follow? Right? That constant question of God's people. Like, yes, we want to be following God, but what are the humans that we're supposed to be listening to and following? And so Zechariah is this book about what does it mean in another wilderness period when we're back home for the first time? Right? That's the theme of the book, I'd say. And then Malachi is sort of this interesting back and forth conversation, sort of even lawsuit with God, and is framed as this back and forth conversation, probably about the same period. There's a mention of governors, which leads us to think that Malachi could be probably just a little bit after Zechariah. But it is in sort of this Persian period where it's sort of benign taxation. So go ahead and build your temple and reconstitute your society, but also give us some resources. So the Persians are the nicest of empires, but an empire nevertheless. So,
right.
And then the question is, okay, God, in this, how are we going to interact? Right? What do we need from you and what do you need from us? And do we feel okay about that? And so it's this very frank exchange going back and forth, talking with God about, okay, what does it mean to be your people?
Thanks, Cory. That's a helpful summary of both of those books.
Yeah, and in thinking of these two books, how would you sum up their messages in a few sentences? What are they trying to tell the people at this point in time?
So Zechariah's core message is that God isn't done. The exile has happened, and to a certain extent it worked. Idolatry is not going to be a huge problem anymore, but other things are. And in the context of the temple being rebuilt, and the houses being rebuilt, and the gates being rebuilt, and the wall being rebuilt, the people need to be rebuilt. And maybe they need to be rebuilt again for the first time. And so Zechariah is thinking about, what does it mean to be followers of God? And so a lot of this message is even maybe thinking back to the time of Moses to say, look, we're in this in-between place. What does forward look like? What does good look like? What does good leadership look like? What does being the people of God look like? Zechariah wants to provide very strong answers to all of those. And then for Malachi, all the exiling and returning in the world can't soften hard hearts. And so you really have to ask yourself what kind of relationship you want to be in with God. That's the work of the book of Malachi.
That's really helpful. So what's a way into each of these books?
Well, I was trying to think of a way into both of them, and I think it's Numbers. Numbers being my favorite book of the Bible, but also just a fun thing to play with. And so in Zechariah, you have these 8 night visions that are sort of rhymed visions. It's a beautiful chiasm. If you want to look at the chart, I should have made a poster board and just hold it up. But it's these 8 visions that come to Zechariah in the night on specific dates. And it's really fun to just say, oh, this was Zechariah dream number 2 day that they come and they give this message about the whole world, about the province itself at this point, about the city, and then about individuals. And that comes back out from that layer. So if you want to dive in, there are great Googleable charts about, or you could just go to Enter the Bible that has a good lesson on this, that have charts about these 8 dreams and how they relate to one another. The way to maybe hop into Malachi is to look at the 6 disagreements. So 8 in Zechariah, 6 in Malachi. You have these back and forth disagreements where the people bring a charge against God and God brings a charge against the people and said, well, maybe you ought to look in the mirror. And then the people say, well, why should we? Because maybe you haven't taken great care of us. And it's this, again, very frank and honest back and forth about, hey, God, we feel let down. And God says, hey, funny that you should say that. I also feel let down. And it's this back and forth.
So that's helpful.
It can be a numbers game.
Yeah. 8 and 6. And as you mentioned, Cory, for our listeners, if you go to enterthebible.org and look up each of these books, Zechariah and Malachi, you'll see more details about that as well. So thanks for that.
Wonderful.
Can I go a bonus round on this too?
Oh, please do.
Please, yeah.
Zechariah, a lot of folk don't encounter it other than through some of the Jesus prophecies, right? So there's talk about a humble shepherd. There's talk about a pierced one. There's talk about the branch again. And so all these things that people will encounter a lot of times in like Advent lectionaries and the rest, there's actually a whole story there. And so you can go back and encounter and say, oh, yes, all these things that the early Christian community and then latter Christian communities applies to Jesus can also be good news in their time to original audiences as well. So that's a fun way into, if you want to look up favorite passages about somebody riding on the foal of a donkey. Fantastic. What does that mean in Persian period?
Yeah, well, thank you for that. So 8 visions in Zechariah, 6 court cases in Malachi, and 5 words in Bible Bingo. That's right.
Hey!
It's time for one of our favorite segments, which is Bible Bingo. And here we have 5 concepts, words, people, places that as you read through Zechariah and Malachi would be on your bingo card. And we've done only 5 for both books. So as we go through them, please tell us whether they correspond to both of the books or just one in particular. And we will start with those 8 visions.
Absolutely. Yeah. So visions would be your first big X on bingo or circle. I don't know which side you're playing on, but these reoccurring visions. And so I should say that it's not just the 8, but there's ongoing visions as well. But these 8 night visions are something of a unit. And so they are going to talk about the whole world. And so the first and 8th visions are about horses or horse-drawn chariots. The 4 specificity that some people like to put in and say these are 4, at least in the first vision, cannot be the case. There's at least 7 horses, if you're reading the Hebrew correctly and closely, I meant to say. But correctly too, why not?
You can say correctly.
Yeah. So there's multiple red horses and there's multiple black horses, and that throws the whole thing off. So like there's multiple white horses. It's just the one red out front, but then there's others. Anyway, there's horses and then there's chariots in the 8th vision, and they're ranging all over the earth and they're looking for peace. What is the condition of the world? right? And then in the second vision and the seventh vision, you have thoughts on exile, right? That the horns are a threatening empire and they're going to bring the people into exile. And then in the seventh vision, God is going to exile wickedness, which doesn't feel great. It's in the form of a woman who gets put in a too small basket for a human anyway, and then taken back to, in the perspective of the people receiving this book, Shinar. So like Babylon, to say like, look, you're back. You happen to still be sinning, which I don't love. I'm just going to take that away from you. And then the third and sixth, I shouldn't have started with numbers. That's too hard. Visions are about, the third is about God using or people. There is a plumb line and the walls are starting to be rebuilt, which is a big issue. And God says, yeah, don't worry about it. Actually, I'm going to provide safety for you. I am your safety. And whoever wants to help, come in on the project. And so this is very, specifically Jerusalem centric. And then the sixth vision is about the lying and the stealing being taken away again in embodied forms by a flying scroll to say, no, God's going to clean up the city. It's going to be fantastic. All this sin stuff were taken away. So the liars and the stealers, the thieves, out of here. And then the fourth and fifth visions, the heart of the chiasm, are about two very significant figures. And there's a bit of a spiritual being battle in vision 4, which we just love. And then somebody gets new clothes. One of my kids once made a mention the Emperor's New Groove here with new clothing. And I'm the slave of my children, and so I'm happy to do it. And then the fifth vision is about this distillation of pure olive oil for temple service. And it's coming from trees, but the trees are people, and we'll talk about them in a little bit. Yeah. But it's these beautiful visions. And then there's ongoing visions about do we commemorate, not celebrate, these fast days that we've been commemorating for years and years because this is when our society fell, but now we're back. And so do we keep fasting because it's not as great as grandma and grandpa told us it was, but we're here. And so should we do it or not? And then who should we follow as we're going through this? So lots of visions, long answer.
So our first word there, visions. Now, the second one you're going to have to hear the hyphens in this word because we have a humble shepherd king.
So the latter parts of Zechariah are about leaders, largely. There's certainly other topics as well. But there is this humble king who's going to come riding on the child of a donkey. Right. And this king is not going to be like the other kings that you might be used to. This king will not oppress, and this king will not wage violent empire conquest wars, but will come to save the people. Right. And this takes different forms. Right. And so a branch is mentioned multiple times. And again, this branch in Zechariah is echoing and feedbacking off language used in Jeremiah. So again, the prophets are reading each other and going back and forth. And then there's this true shepherd that is struck. Other shepherds aren't as trustworthy and maybe are actually really mean to the sheep. But there's this one shepherd coming, figuring a future king who will allow himself to be struck indeed, to go through suffering on behalf of and in defense of the sheep, and God's calling to protect the sheep.
Thank you. All right. So visions, a humble shepherd king. And then number 3, messiahs with an S.
With an S. This is tough for folk. And when I teach Intro to Hebrew Bible, we have a game where we count the messiahs. So as many times as messiahs are mentioned in scripture, you just put a little check mark up and we count at the end of the semester. How many did we get? So in the fifth vision in Zechariah 4, 1 through 14, we have 2 messiahs, so double points. if you're playing the Count the Messiahs game at home. There are two leaders, Joshua the high priest and Zerubbabel, sort of the civic leader, the governor, who are both named as God's anointed ones. So in the fourth vision, Joshua has been in the middle of a fight between the angel of the Lord and the Satan, going back and forth with the Satan accusing Joshua. And he's in these terrible, dirty clothes and looks not like a high priest at all. And he gets these brand new clothes, and it's wonderful for him. The Zerubbabel, we don't know what he's wearing. But in the fifth vision, they both are olive trees, right? And they are producing by piping, which is really neat. There's a lot of great research about the technology in this particular vision. If you go to whole seminars on this.
Society of Biblical Literature.
Yep. There's some sort of piping that takes the olive from the trees, processes it, and gets it to the lamps for temple service. And so these two people are messiahs. They are anointed persons who are sort of in a reciprocal task. They produce the olive oil that would be used to anoint people, and they themselves are anointed to produce the olive oil that is used to anoint people, and on and on. And so these are messiahs who produce the ability to make other messiahs, right? This is a sort of holiness recognized in human persons that leads to the potential for more human holiness, to say, we are going to make this whole thing better. And God has anointed these two people such that anointing would be flowing out, or that light giving oil would be flowing out. So this is good for them, but it's better for everybody else. And in fact, it's actually going to be pretty difficult for them, but it's going to be good for the whole of society that we have these two leaders at the same time.
Very interesting. The fourth word is relationship.
All right, switching over to Malachi here. The tightest and most furious relationships are the ones where we can have disagreements, right? I don't have fights with people I don't care about. And I don't have like crying fights or like crying therapy sessions with people with whom I'm not super enmeshed and very close to. That's what we see in Malachi. These are the people and God who have been through so much. And this is at the close of the Christian canon of the Hebrew Bible. This is what you get, right? After creation, after the patriarchs and matriarchs, after the journey through slavery and bondage in Egypt, through the wilderness times, through the judges, through the kings and the prophets and the exile and the return and the reconstitution of society. This has been a long relationship that's been characterized by ups and downs and intimacy and expulsion and heartbreak and love. Like the language of the Psalms is being sung by people who are being led away and by people who are being led back. And this is finally the therapist's couch, where people and God are going back and forth. And the question, how have you loved us? I don't feel loved by you. God, how have you loved us? And you can feel God like getting defensive and then saying, take a breath. Here's how. And then maybe getting a little bit defensive in the here's how, right? And that back and forth, that's how I want folk to enter the Bible, to say there's real emotions and there's a real story at stake here. And like anybody who's ever been in love and been hurt can relate to Malachi, right? We're trying. God, we're trying. But there's a lot here, and we just need to deal with it in order to move forward. So this book, as much and maybe more than most, is about relationships. And like, what does it mean to be really honest and plain and lay it all out there between humans and God?
That's really beautiful, Cory, your description of that.
All right, we've come to the last of our concepts, and that is Day of the Lord. And I have in parentheses here, and or Elijah. Tell us about that.
So after the 6 arguments back and forth, there's this other section, and it is, okay, so now what? And the now what is God saying, I'm going to come to you. I am going to resolve this thing. Like, we will go back and forth, and you have things that you're upset about, and I certainly have things that I'm upset about too. But what is going to happen is that I am going to come to you, and everything, or at least most stuff, will be made right. And how you're going to know that this is going to happen is Elijah is going to come first, right? This Tishbe, this Giladi, right? This guy who, not that many chapters when you think about it, but the preparer of the way of the Lord, the guy who cut out early, if I'm perfectly honest, and announced retirement before it was time, is going to come back and is going to come back and prepare the way of the Lord. And the Lord is going to say, look, all the things that lead you to be able to ask the question, how have you loved us? I'm going to love you so well. And that's going to be the day of the Lord. And if you're not on the home team, let's say, it's not going to work as great. But Elijah is going to come back and really going to let you know, hey, let's make those decisions. Whose team are you on? And how's this day going to go?
Wonderful. Well, thank you. So that has been Bible Bingo.
Thanks so much, Cory. So you've mentioned a number of passages and verses and chapters in Zechariah and Malachi. Are there others that you would be sure to address in either or both of those books?
One that comes up a lot is in Malachi, and especially chapter 2, speaking about divorce. And so if you remember back the Ezra-Nehemiah conversation, right, there's this question of, in a post-exilic society reconstituted, what are we going to do about mixed ethnic, but more importantly, mixed religious marriages? And so one of the primordial fears of the Israelites is mixed religious marriages that lead to idolatry, right? And so the Baal of Peor from Numbers is front and center for Ezra and Nehemiah's thinking, right? People have done what we in high school used to call missionary dating, to say, look, would love to go to the sock hop, but maybe you want to worship Baal on your way. And that could be fun. And this is a great Israelite fear. And this is a great Judahite fear. And this is a great Judean fear after the exile. And so Ezra and Nehemiah say, look, we can't possibly have this. You have to divorce your spouse, that if they are worshiping another god, what's going to happen to the kids? We cannot have this. They're flabbergasted. And so Malachi also enters the conversation, and there's different ways that Malachi has been interpreted, and I just want to hold two of them together. So Malachi could be saying very much, in Malachi, God famously says, I hate divorce, right? Or I hate the sending away, literally the sending away of spouses. And so it could be, Rashi says, that Malachi is saying, look,
and remind our listeners who Rashi is, sorry.
Rashi is 10th century French Jewish sage living in Provence, probably eating really good food, and coming up with a systematic commentary of the Hebrew Bible.
Okay.
Just a beautiful place to enter into rabbinic studies if you're interested. Rashi's very approachable and translated into English all over the internet. And so Rashi's saying, look, Malachi says that God hates divorce, but God doesn't hate all divorce. Let's, be real. God hates divorce of first spouses. So Rashi reads Malachi reading Ezra to say the Israelites' problem wasn't that they married worshipers of other gods. It's that they married worshipers of other gods in addition to their Israelite spouses. They were married to Israelites who worshiped the Lord first, and they neglected them. That was the so-called wife of their youth. Who were neglected, and then because exile's hard, rebuilding's hard, and so Rashi gets very specific to say, the people who come back, they're a little scrawny, right? They work hard, they're trying to rebuild walls, they don't eat as well, and then you see these beautiful people of the land who are already there and well established, and they're eating more dates, and that they're very fit. I'll let the reader understand. And so you neglect your first spouse and pursue the second one. And maybe you're even thinking about divorcing your returned exilic wife. Don't do that thing, right? And so Rashi says, I hate divorce, which is to say, go ahead and divorce the spouses who worship the other gods. that's fine. Just don't divorce your Israelite spouse. Other interpretations don't say some divorce is fine. They say like, no, please don't do that thing, right? Like, don't leave your spouse. And so this might be a rejoinder to Ezra and
Yeah.
Nehemiah to
Mhm.
say, look, you're married, right? Whatever else it is, right? Like, you're already married, and God is not served by like unsupported women and children. So
Right.
do not divorce. If you married a person, and there is this line in Malachi that says like, it's not great that you married people who worship another God, but be that as it may, don't make it worse by divorcing them. And so two views, people battle back and forth, and that's fine. But people should probably know that, like, if folks know Malachi, it's not because of the debate over how healthy animals have to be sacrificed, but it's because of a divorce conversation that is ongoing, right? And is in a certain context. And so whatever else, Malachi is directly speaking to Ezra and Nehemiah. And what Malachi is saying, scholars go both ways and other ways as well, but God has strong feelings about some sort of divorce that's happening. But it is heavily contextualized, and we want to be specific about that right up front, because Malachi certainly is.
That's interesting. You've touched on a couple places already where these two books, which are maybe not as well known, really touch on both the life of the church in terms of Advent and the imagery there, but then, as you said, also in contemporary debates. What are some other ways in which these books are important for Christian life and theology?
Thanks. Zechariah is really an important source for Christian early theology and indeed Christology. You can imagine being in the first century and you're not one of the privileged folk who get to eat with Jesus after the resurrection, but you still want to believe, but the Romans killed him and there's no independent Judea. What on earth? And then all of a sudden, you get this Bible study essentially handed to you that maybe first happened on a walk to Emmaus, or maybe it first happened in an upper room, or maybe it first happened elsewhere. But Scripture says again and again that Jesus taught about himself in the Scriptures, right? And so if you are a disappointed partisan of Jesus, like, the Romans are still here and they're actually still crucifying other people. What happened? The early Christian community, and probably Jesus giving Bible studies, goes back to Zechariah and said, oh no, it's not like that. It's like this. And so the shepherd actually can be struck, right? Like, that is what a good shepherd defending God's people might be. And that person might be pierced, and that person wouldn't come on a Roman chariot, but might ride a young donkey, right? Or might ride the descendant of a blue mule, right? Like, that this actually might look very, very differently. And if you reconsider the words of the prophets beforehand, you might understand what Jesus was about in not just having a bloodbath and killing all the Romans, right? And so Zechariah is so important, and especially the latter portions of Zechariah is so important for helping Christians and early Jewish Christians, or Christian Jews, understand that messianism didn't look like the messianism I was expecting.
Mm-hmm.
Why? And so to go back to a text that's written relatively late, close to their time period, to say like, oh, this is maybe 200, 300, 400 years before. Okay. Yeah, I see a humble king. I see a pierced shepherd. Okay. Yeah. And so this book really contextualizes a lot of the early interpretations of Jesus that we carry to this day, right? When we see Jesus as other than a general leading armies to kill other humans, but see somebody who would rather suffer redemptively than kill Romans, Zechariah is a chief source for that.
And Malachi?
Yeah, there's a really neat carry through. Kathryn, you mentioned that Malachi doesn't necessarily end Jewish canons of Hebrew Bible, but it does end the Christian canon of Hebrew Bible. And Malachi ends with this beautiful kind of two-sided image of a rising sun, S-U-N, that has healing in its wings for those who are on Team God. And for those who are on Team Injustice, it's a burning furnace, right? And so that language very early on in the Gospels that talk about John the Baptizer's mission gets picked up. And so the coming one, or the Son of Man, or whoever we're calling Jesus, has sort of this dual role of light and healing and teaching and illuminating, but also burning. And so this furnace image, this chaff burning image, gets picked up directly from Malachi just a couple chapters later into Matthew, and to say, look, what did you expect? If a son was coming, S-U-N or S-O-N, of course it would have a dual role, just as the sun has, right? It can be warmth and healing and nice and illuminating, and you can walk safely by it. But also it burns and it stings. And if you don't put on sun lotion, right, like you're going to have bad problems, right? And so John the Baptizer is very much saying, all right, Malachi, let's go. Let's keep going. So there is this messianic figure coming. God promises to get skin in the game and have this day of the Lord. What would you expect? But exactly a sun that both burns and illuminates. And you get to pick which side you're on.
As a fun little tidbit, that sun, S-U-N, S-O-N pun is also a pun in Greek.
Is it?
Really?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So they're spelled differently, but because of the way the vowels changed, the word for sun in Greek is helios, and the word for sun is helios. So there's just a difference of one letter between them.
There we go.
I love that.
There we go.
Yeah.
A little bonus information.
A good pun.
Yeah. So Cory, you may have already addressed this, but are there any other key themes that you'd want people to look for as they think about these books?
Drawing particularly on Malachi, but also Zechariah a little bit. What we see in the text is the presence and the willingness to be adaptable of God, right? Like we're in plans D, E, and F at this point, right? The garden was what it was, right? Like the wedding at Sinai was what it was. The prophets were what they were. The kings before them were what they were. The exile, right? Like, I'm going to let this terrible thing happen, and then you're going to come back to me, and it's going to be great, except it isn't, right? It's still a fraught relationship. And so Malachi, especially, this conversation going back and forth, is just so deep and beautiful and maddening because it's real, right? It's, God, how could you have let this happen? Or like, why didn't this prayer get answered that I prayed just this morning? Well, okay, well, why didn't it get prayed? And this back and forth, and God's adaptability and willingness to enter into conversations to say, like, at a very late date in the story, but also at the very beginning of the story,
right?
Okay, let's have a conversation. Let's go back and forth, right? Like, I am the king of the universe, enthroned in heaven with all of the ministering angels before me, but you have a complaint. So let's hear it, and then let's go back and forth. And one of the worst things I'm told that you can do is ignore a complaint, right? That feels really dehumanizing. It feels like our concerns don't matter. The best thing I think you can hear is listen like non-defensively and just really engage in it. What we have here is kind of something between, to say, you did this, yes, but I've done that, and you've done that, and we've gone back and forth. And it is just this bittersweet, but like really beautiful image of God saying, I could have given up 5, 6, 7, 8 times now, but let's try this other thing, and let's try this other thing, and let's keep trying. I love that image.
That's beautiful.
God's not willing to let go and like keeps the conversation.
Well, that's wonderful. We have come to our close, and as per usual, we're going to do our 7-word summaries, but we're going to give you 14 words to end the Old Testament, 7 for each. So tell us, how would you describe Zechariah and Malachi in 7 words each?
So for Zechariah, if you're ready, let's start again today. Then Malachi, working for healthy relationship, but you first. It's just that back and forth. I love it.
That's great. I find these 7 words or less are often the most creative parts of these episodes. And I love both of those. Well, thank you so much, Cory. I can't tell you how delighted we are to have you wrapping up the Christian Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, for us in this episode. Obviously, there's much, much more that could be said, but thank you so much for educating us about Zechariah and Malachi. And for our listeners, again, just a reminder, so this is our final episode in the Christian Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible. And next week, we'll be moving into the New Testament, into the Gospel of Matthew, and then into the rest of the Gospels. And just to remind you of what Cory already reminded us, that there's a reason Malachi is put at the end of the Old Testament here. It leads right into that, the humble shepherd king and the sun rising with healing in its wings, and the prophet Elijah coming before the great and terrible day of the Lord. So for all of those reasons, it's really theologically profound that Malachi then moves into that new story, but that new story that builds on the old story that we've been talking about for the last many weeks. So thank you for listening to our listeners. This has been the Bible in a Year podcast from Enter the Bible. As always, check out more great resources on the Bible at enterthebible.org, where we have conversations, reflections, commentaries, courses, anything that you would need as you dive in and enter the Bible with curiosity and faith. If you enjoyed this podcast, please rate and review or like and subscribe. And of course, the very best compliment you can give us is to share this podcast with a friend. Until next time.